Treasury chief warning today that the longer the nation is shut down, the greater the potential long-term damage to the country as more than 36 million Americans are out of work. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin testified for the first time about how exactly they are handling the $2 trillion rescue package that rolled out last month. And this comes after a new report found the Treasury had spent very little of the $500 billion that Congress allocated for businesses and state and local governments. One of the more testy exchanges came when Democrat Sherrod Brown pressed Secretary Mnuchin on the risks of reopening the economy too soon.
You're pushing people back into the workplace. There's been no national program to provide worker safety. The president says reopen slaughterhouses, nothing about slowing the line down, nothing about getting protective equipment. Is how many workers should give their lives to increase the GDP or the Dow Jones by 1,000 points?
You know, workers should give their lives to do that, Mr. Senator, and I think your characterization is unfair.
Larry Summers joining me now. He served as Treasury Secretary during the Clinton administration, and he was the director of the National Economic Council during the Obama administration. Larry, first I'd ask you, did you think Sherrod Brown's characterization was unfair?
No, I thought it was broadly appropriate. Secretary Mnuchin and the Trump administration are right to be concerned about getting the economy going. What they're wrong about is thinking that you can just decree it and have it be so. The right thing for the country to be doing is a far more ambitious program of testing, a far more ambitious program of contact tracing, a far more ambitious program of encouraging people to wear masks, a far more ambitious program of being carefully strategic about which areas you open up and which areas you strengthen the protections in. If we do that, we can have a stronger economy and better health status for our people. What's remarkable, actually, is how unavailing for the economy opening things up is when people are still scared. If you look at the consumer sales data in a state like Georgia that has tossed things wide open, and in a state like New York where things are very restricted, there's remarkably little difference. And the reason is that people aren't going to go out and do a lot of economic activity if they're still very apprehensive. And so the real tragedy is that the administration has set up this horrible argument about health versus economics and has missed out on the medical and health investments that are likely to cut across both and could enable us to do better in terms of protecting the population, our most fundamental objective, and also strengthen the economy. This kind of policy that's being suggested is an invitation to a catastrophic second wave. And
and making people feel perhaps even more afraid to participate in the economy. When you hear this report, look, you're someone who can tell us whether this is normal or not. This report that found the Treasury has spent very little of the $500 billion allocated for businesses and state and local governments. Is that troubling to you? Is that normal at this point in time? Does this raise concerns?
Part troubling, part less worrisome to me. It's an egregious error that we're not giving more money to state and local governments that are desperate if they're going to fight crime, if they're going to fight fires, if they're going to staff municipal hospitals, if they're going to be ready for what's going to be a very difficult hot summer. The failure to disperse money to state and local governments is inexcusable. With respect to business relief, we've got to be very careful. And in some ways, the early statements of the Treasury were not careful enough, that we're doing it in ways that maximize the interests of the broad American people and not just the interests of shareholders. I think that it was a huge error on the part of the Treasury to give large grants to the airlines with no expectation of repayment. And I think if we're taking some time to make sure that our financial support for business is done in a way that helps workers, that helps consumers, that helps the economy, and isn't a bailout to their shareholders, I actually think it might well be appropriate to take time. Whether that's what they're doing with the time or not, I'm not really in a position to judge. But we certainly saw a certain amount of abuse in the PPP program. Rich think tanks, the LA Lakers getting financial assistance, and being careful to avoid those errors is in the future is probably the right thing. Whether we're going to find the right formulas or not, I don't know. And frankly, the administration doesn't have a terrific track record. But I'm prepared to suspend judgment on that, but not on the failure to help state and local governments.
I will say, when Senator Elizabeth Warren pressed Mnuchin on why some businesses are getting federal funding and they're not required to keep their workers employed, he was very non-committal on that. So just a note, one of the things when they're coming to looking for assurances, perhaps not as strong as you would like. Larry Summers, thank you so much for your input.
Thank you.